gone into every single company, and it's all like that. And I'll show you which one. That one runs in front of everybody with his back to us and goes, selfie! And he goes like that with the camera. Because you know how people take pictures of themselves, don't they?
Come a little closer. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to York, and welcome to the original Ghost Walk of York. My name is Ray Alexander, and tonight it's going to be my pleasure to take you around some of the historic, mysterious, and perhaps haunted sites of York. But before we set off, I'd like to say a few words about the city of York itself, and a little bit about some of the stories that I'll be telling you this evening. York, as you probably know already, has a recorded history that dates back to AD 71. That was when the Romans came here. But when the Romans arrived here, they found people living here for over 1,000 years before they came, a tribe of local people who were called Brigantes. Their original leader was a man called Eburus, and the legend has it that he gave his name to the settlement. The first recorded name for York was Eboracum. So you can imagine, can't you, that a settlement that has a history of well over 3,000 years, but have in that time much of the human tragedy and trauma that goes to make what we popularly call today ghosts. And that is the case with the city of York. But along with that great span of history, there's something else that gives us a few problems on a walk like tonight's, and that's change. The city has changed a lot over the years, and it means that some of the places where these hauntings occurred no longer exist in their original form, and that makes it difficult when we try to go there. To give you an example of that, there is one marvellous story in York about the old judge's lodgings. But if I tried to take you there tonight, we'd have to end up in what is now the corn plaster department of Boots the chemist, which, as you can see, is probably not the best place to tell a ghost story. So I shan't be telling the judge's lodgings story tonight, as some of the places are quite simply too far for us to reach, and what will be quite a gentle stroll around the city, interspersed with the occasional story. So, if we are not in the place of a haunting, I'll tell you where that place is, so that if you ever have the time or the desire, you can go there yourself. But if we are in the place of a haunting, I'll tell you that too. Now, I'll just say a few words about the stories themselves, because I must be honest with you, when I first heard them, I was quite frankly disappointed. One or two of them didn't seem to have the good, satisfying endings that we all expect of a ghost story, like those that you read in books, watch on films, or see on the television. And it wasn't until I started to research these stories for myself that I discovered a good reason why that should be the case. It's because every story that I'm going to tell you tonight is true. It's an event that has happened to someone at some time. They've told other people about it. Later, the stories were researched, then put in a book, published in 1975, written by a local historian and schoolteacher by the name of John Mitchell. So let me reassure you, if any of the stories were fictitious, we would have thought up jolly good endings for all of them. But the fact that one or two of them are mysterious or unexplained really only serves to prove that they are in fact quite true. So having said that, I'll move on to the first story tonight. Just a little upstream from where we met, just beyond Dew's Bridge and on the other side of the river, now dominating the skyline, is the Park Inn Hotel. Before the Park Inn was there was at one time on that site a row of medieval cottages. You can still get an impression of what North Street used to look like. If you were to go down there now and stand with your back to the hotel, across the road you'll see the medieval church All Saints. To the right of All Saints, the only remaining row of medieval cottages still in North Street. But if you were to imagine how it may have looked when most of the modern buildings that are there now were actually more like the medieval cottages, you'll then have an image in your minds of North Street as it was just 50 years ago. It was one Christmas Eve. A family came into York to celebrate midnight mass. The son, who had just arrived home from college, drove his parents into town. But when they arrived at the church, he said he wasn't going to celebrate midnight mass with them there at All Saints. He was going to cross the river to hear mass in a Catholic church. He did, however, promise that he would return to collect his parents and take them home when the service was ended. About an hour or so later, when he returned to North Street and found it still filled with cars, the service in All Saints hadn't quite finished, and he had to park some distance away in order to walk down to the church to meet his parents. And as he passed the row of medieval cottages that at that time were still standing alongside the church, he saw in front of one of them someone that he knew very well indeed, his mother's oldest friend. They had known each other since school days, and although they weren't related, he always called her Aunt Mary as a mark of respect. And he called out to her in the early hours of that Christmas morning, "Merry Christmas, Aunt Mary, good to see you." He crossed the road so he could spend a few moments talking to her, and he asked how she was. She said that she was very well and very happy. She asked after his parents, and he said, "Well, they're fine, thanks, Aunt Mary. In fact, they're in church right now. If you'd like to wait a few moments, I'll bring them down to have a few words with you." And all of a sudden, Aunt Mary became uneasy. She said, No, you mustn't do that. I must be getting back now." She turned towards the church, just as the congregation started to leave. And then she turned back to him and said hastily, "Before I go, I want you to promise that you will do one thing for me. Will you please wish your parents from me a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year?" He said that he would. And already Aunt Mary had turned and started to make her way back towards the house. But as she went, she waved over her shoulder and called, "Don't forget to give my message to your parents." He walked down to the church, and as his parents came out, he said, "Merry Christmas. I've just seen Aunt Mary. She's very well and very happy." And all of a sudden, the colour drained from his mother's face. She rocked backwards and forwards on her feet, and for a few moments they thought that she was going to faint. But after a while, when she recovered, she said, "No, I'm sorry, dear, but you can't have done." He said, "Yes, she asked me to wish you and Father a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." His mother said, No, I'm sorry, dear, but since you've arrived home from college, there hasn't been time for me to tell you all the news. And I'm afraid there's one very sad piece of news I've not yet found an opportunity to tell you. But you see, you can't have been speaking with Mary just now, because she died a month ago." Now, we don't know why it was, but in the early hours of that Christmas morning, the ghost of someone who died a month before appeared to that young man. All we do know was that it had a most profound effect on him. The college where he was studying at that time was a seminary, and he was at the point where he had to make the most important decision of his life, whether or not to take holy orders and become a Catholic priest. In the early hours of that Christmas morning, seeing the ghost of his mother's oldest friend, whose name, coincidentally, was Mary, helped him to make up his mind. He became a Catholic priest. We know that that was the effect that sighting had. What we don't know was the reason for it. That remains a mystery. And I leave that mystery with you. We're going to be moving on shortly. But before we do, I'd just like to ask if you feel all right so far. I ask for good reason. It's at this stage on the walk I usually like to give a little warning. If in any of the places to which I take you tonight, or during any of the stories that I tell, you feel uneasy, please let me know. I don't promise to do anything for you. I'd just like to know. I hope, certainly, that no one will feel uncomfortable in any place or during any story tonight. But I do ask just one small favour of you, if you don't mind. Do please keep smiling for me. It's most reassuring. I always hate it when the eyes glaze over. Especially when the eyes that glaze over are mine. Yeah. I hope it won't happen tonight. But we'll soon see, won't we? Because we're going to start our journey. But before we do, I have two small matters that I'd like to raise with you. The first is a personal appeal. The second, a horror story. a personal appeal. I hope that you won't mind this. If tonight, as we go round, any of you wish to smoke, will you please kindly do it only as we move from place to place and not while I'm telling the stories. I have a lot of difficulty with it. It affects my breathing. So if you would therefore please very kindly not smoke while I tell the stories, that'll help me to make your evening all the more enjoyable. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Now the horror story.